Welcome back to The Price of Business. I'm your host, Kevin Price, talking to you about you and your business. Tony Powers, he's a regular feature on The Price of Business. Great radio personality with italkus.com. Also, his home station out there in the Carolinas and Georgia. And always glad to have you on the program. How are you, my friend?
Doing great, Kevin. How are you?
Doing excellent. Thanks as always for joining us. And first of all, let's talk a little bit about iTalk US and tell us what it's all about.
Well, italkus.com. You can go there and stream us live 24/7, 365. And, of course, my program, Powers to the People, is 3 to 6 Monday through Friday, Eastern Time. And I'm also on redstatetalkradio.com. So you can go to iTalkUS or redstatetalkradio.com and listen to the program Monday through Friday every week.
How does Red State Talk work? How does that work? Is that a podcast platform or what is that?
Well, actually, no. They stream live, and they have 6 stations across the country, and we're on there, and they have a great lineup of conservative talkers, and we're, of course, honored to be on there and glad to have those Red State listeners now.
Yeah, no question about it. That's fantastic. Congratulations. So what are you guys talking about? What is your audience and you talking about these days?
Well, of course, everybody's talking about ISIS, what just happened over in Paris. And, of course, just yesterday we find out that there were 5 Syrians with fake passports from Greece trying to come up through our southern border, and they were trying to attempt to come into the country. And then I believe there were 8 more that were caught in Texas. So, the president wants to bring in 10,000 plus Syrian refugees. He's of course making fun of Republicans and saying, "Oh, you're scared of widows and children," when actually we know that the vast majority of these people are young fighting age men, and the president is willing to put our national security at risk and the safety of Americans at risk just to prove a political point. And, his foreign policy, I think, is going to end up biting him on the butt. This is one of those times when you would think that he'd want to do a little CYA, and he's not doing it. And if something happens, he's going to have American blood on his hands.
Yeah, no question about that. What's interesting about this, first of all, I wrote an article back in May that showed up in Huffington Post and a lot of other places that said, the ISIS strategy to overtake Rome has unfolded. And what I wrote in that article is that I don't think most Americans realize this, but it's pretty well known. A lot of the European newspapers have documented this, that the boats that are being used to migrate people from North Africa to Europe are owned by ISIS. In other words, ISIS is the coyote, to use our expression here, of transporting these refugees. You and I both know they're going to put their people among those huge number of probably, just like you and I simply want freedom and don't want oppression, individuals. But they're also going to put their own, like a cancer, into those mobs. And so I predicted this back in May. Anyone who's surprised is shame on them.
Well, I don't know why we'd be surprised. They've actually said they were going to do it. Maybe it's time we start taking these people at their word, because they say they're going to do things. They do it. And somehow, our commander-in-chief seems surprised. And then the other day we had John Kerry. I don't know if you heard Kerry and his crazy remarks, where he basically said the Charlie Hebdo killings were somehow justified, or there was a rationale for it. I mean, we have people running this country that are just inept, and they're going to end up getting Americans killed.
Yeah, and then what's also interesting is, I don't know if you recall reading this, but there early on, when ISIS was beginning to rise to a major force in the terrorism neighborhood. There's so many of these groups. The big ones are ISIS and of course Al Qaeda, but there's so many of them, and they're all trying to flex muscle and prestige. But their biggest criticism of Al Qaeda, ISIS had to Al Qaeda, was the fact that they were targeting Western targets, which would invite Western attack into their territories. And proof is in the pudding. Look what happened in Afghanistan, and Al Qaeda essentially lost Afghanistan. You got to sit there and wonder, what is ISIS thinking when they're attacking someone like France?
Well, I think that they will, I really believe, and I believe they've said this, that they want us to go over there and fight them. They're anxious to fight Americans. They're anxious to fight the Europeans because they believe that it's going to end up being this big last apocalyptic war that's going to take place over there. It's going to bring about the 12th Iman or whatever they believe, but I think they really have this apocalyptic view of things, and they want to see this big battle, and they believe that somehow they're going to win it. But if we actually had a president and some leaders in Europe, I think France is now waking up, who actually saw this for what it is. We could wipe. I mean, you got 30,000 guys over there with not that really heavy of armament. We could wipe them out in a month, and yet nobody's doing it.
Yep, it should be a rude awakening, don't you think?
Oh, yeah. And this thing in France is it should be waking up Americans, and the fact that the president wants to bring in these refugees, and I kind of put that word refugees in air quotes because. Again, they said they were going to infiltrate those refugees. Why wouldn't we take their word at that?
Mm-hmm. So talk a little bit about, what should we be doing? I like what I'm hearing from Paul Ryan, that we need to obviously, curtail this. Props, obviously, to Republican governors. At the last I heard, one Democratic governor saying, we don't want them. You can take them, but we don't want them, and they would prefer, because you know how people are once they get into a state that allows them, it doesn't take much to get them into a state that doesn't want them. So that's part of the problem. But props to those governors for taking a stand. Oh, yeah. I mean, you've got, I think, 32 governors now who are saying they don't want these folks to come into their states. But you're absolutely right. I mean, once you get into the country, you have freedom of movement here. We are a free country, and people can move around so they can end up wherever they want to be. But the thing about Paul Ryan, that kind of, he says a lot of good things. And I listened to his speech yesterday, but they want this thing to be a standalone bill that the president's going to veto, that they won't be able to override. And once again, you see the Republicans in Congress refusing to use the power of the purse. December 11th, there's a big funding bill coming up. They should attach this to a must-pass bill. Obama's just going to veto it, and nothing's going to happen except a show vote. And that's what just infuriates me with the Republicans. This is one of those 90-10 issues that they could win easily. And if the president wanted to shut down the government so he could bring in refugees from Syria, I think the American people would be on the Republican side. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. I just, I'm so torn. You and I have, we were back in 2012, we just couldn't see a way that Barack Obama, who is leading the worst economy since the Great Depression, could be the only president since FDR to have numbers like this. To get reelected, and guess what? He got reelected. So I no longer call these things. And the Republican ability to destroy their capacity to win reelection or win races is really quite impressive. If it actually had any qualitative or quantitative value. But I just think it'd be very hard for them to even figure out how to lose this.
Well, they're doing their level best. I mean, because they continue to ignore the base. The base is beginning to realize that these show votes, it's one thing to say, okay, we voted against Obamacare, he vetoed it. Oh, that military spending bill, he vetoed it, so we had to cave into him. They're going to, I think the public, and especially the base in the Republican Party, the conservatives, are beginning to realize that, these show votes that they're having are meaningless. And what we really need is to have some people who are going to stand up for the American people and actually do what we sent them there to do.
Yep.
And that is to stop the agenda of this president. He's still got a year plus. He can do a lot of damage in that time. Just look what's happened over the last 6 months.
Unbelievable. All right. His name's Tony Powers. He's a regular guest on The Price of Business. He's with italkus.com. I encourage you to check him out. Tony, you're awesome. Thanks, my friend.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
You bet. And we'll have you back on soon. All right, when we come back, much more for you. I do want to remind you, best content here shows up over there at usdailyreview.com, and you're listening to The Price of Business.